The anniversary of the end of the Second World War winds down, giving this Remembrance Day an especially poignant feel. We welcome to our program a man who fought during World War II and who was also a prisoner of war from 1943 until 1945. He has written his memoirs in a book called Almost a Lifetime. It's a detailed and fascinating, if not an extraordinary, account of life in Stalag VIIIB in southeastern Germany. Our guest is John McMahon. He was shot down in February of 1943 over Holland while flying on his first and only bombing mission with the Royal Air Force, and we welcome him to the studio.
Thank you.
Now, you've written this fascinating book, and it is quite the account. Why did you write the book?
Well, John, I wrote this book originally for the family to leave behind an account of some of my experiences during the war. And then it mushroomed into this book. People read my manuscript and said, why don't you try and get this published? And 1983 was when I started it first. And in 1987, I did send it away to some of the bigger publishing companies like McFarlane and Stewart, Stoddard's, etc., and got wonderful reviews, but they had no room for it. Then it was shelved for a number of years. And until recently, Looking Books and Lansville picked it up and decided it was worth putting it out on the market for the 50th anniversary of the war ending.
The book really grabbed me because normally when I get a book I just sort of skim quickly through it, but I sat down and I read it from cover to cover, and it's such a compelling document, and it just jumps right out at you. The whole book's in your face all the time, and I'd just like to ask you why, how you got the quotes, because there's so many quotes. The book is filled with them, and under normal circumstances one would just sort of write a sort of a third-person narrative.
Well, I think that if I had started 1983 to write that, I could not have written it the way I did. I worked for Kraft Cheese Company for 30 years, and during my time on the road, I kept steno notebooks for each year of the war, and you would think of something as you drove the highway. I would stop, write it down, and this went on for many years, till eventually, at the end of probably 10 years, I had all this massive information. And that is how I really got all this conversation into the book.
Now, you joined up as so many hundreds of thousands of other young Brits did in World War II, and you joined the Royal Air Force, and I believe you were a flight engineer, a flight sergeant by rank.
Yes, well, I joined, first of all, I joined ground staff, and I was 2 years in ground staff, 1940 to 1942, helping to repair aircraft as they came back from bombing raids. And it was 1943 when I joined aircrew.
And your first flight was your last flight?
First flight was the last flight. Yes, skipper had been over before, but it was one of those things that happened. The Luftwaffe had these night fighters, like a wall of night fighters across Holland, and they would go up and down according to the height that the bombers were flying at that night, and you had to go through that wall to the target and back out again. You were at 19,000 feet on your way to Cologne with a full load of bombs? Correct, yes.
And then all hell broke loose?
That is true. It was, what happens is the night fighters come up, they home in on you, and ME-110s with 5mm cannons pointing backwards. And they fly underneath your aircraft, and we didn't have any, what they called belly gunner at that time. And they fly with you, and take their time. When they're ready, they spray you with cannon shells and dive away before you blow up or otherwise.
Now, the ride down, if that's what it was, must have been just terrifying. What was going through your mind as the plane spiraled out of the sky?
Well, you think sometimes back when you're in a skid on a car, and your whole mind is trying to stop that skid. You haven't time really to get fear for the moment. When you're going down, there's no way you can get out of those things once you start spiraling, because you're thrown all over the inside of the aircraft. And I remember being stuck once inside and between the two front guns. But what happened to me, the bombardier opened the escape, or tried to open the escape hatch, and when you're sorely below up there at 19,000 feet, it was frozen solid, and he jumped on it. And I didn't know till later, till German information told me that he fell through without a parachute. So the escape hatch was open. And actually, it was a miracle that I got out, because we were for a long time coming down, and it was only about 1,000 feet or less before the aircraft plowed into the ground that my fingers, I was holding on to hydraulic pipelines, and my fingers got so numb I couldn't hold on any longer, and I was thrown forward, and my head and shoulders went through the escape hatch, and I was sucked out. My flying boot caught, and lucky enough I didn't have it buckled tight, and it was ripped off. And when I landed in the Cloud Field, aircraft was just across the road. So it was one of those minimum parachute jumps.
It was within a matter of hours that you were captured by the Germans.
I was captured very, very soon.
You must have been in a state of shock when that was happening.
This is true. You don't... you think, if ever I'm taken prisoner, how am I going to feel? But 3 young Dutch people carried me into their mum and dad's home, and I was only there, I'm sure, 20 minutes whenever in burst 2 German Luftwaffe military police with their guns pointed, and I was sitting at a table with the family. And I found the Luftwaffe were very good, really. They took me prisoner and took me to the WWII Air Base, and I was in a cell there, and I think I put in some chapter of my book where I believe that the person who shot us down came to see me in the cell.
Major Stalag.
Major Stalag came to see me in the cell, and not knowing the German language, he gave a lot of orders to subordinates, and very shortly a mattress and pillow was brought to me because I was lying on boards. So there was sort of a esprit de corps between the 2 air forces at times.
It wasn't always an esprit de corps. You took a long train ride across Holland and Germany to your prison camp. We
did, yes. We were handed over to the German army in Holland. There's about 12 of us who were garnered in from all around the area. All the people had been shot down, and 12 of them and myself were taken to Amsterdam prison, actually. And from there we were put on a train to go east across Germany and finished up in Stalag VIIIB on the Polish border.
So what happened when you first arrived there, the prison camp?
Of course, you are to get the usual welcome from the commandant, which is quite a little propaganda speech he makes, that don't try to escape and you'll be well cared for, and there'll be tea for you when you go into your camp, etc. But when we were marched into camp, I remember looking at the prison compounds. There was 10 compounds in that camp. There was about 1,000 people in each compound. The camp was built for 10,000. At the end of the war, there was about 40,000 in it. But you're looking for faces that you know. And on the way in, the people who were captured at Dunkirk were the first compounds we saw.
That was in 1940, so they'd already been there for more than 2 years.
They had been through the mill and had a very, very rough time. Then, further up the camp, we came upon the WWII boys, who, as you know, was October.
That was August
rather, 42. And to the left of them were all these boys in blue, the Air Force. Just like, as I said, just like a school kids out in the yard playing. They're all 19, 20, 21. And one of my friends that I had did some training with, by Big Jock, we called him, and I could see him head and shoulders above the rest, and he was shouting to me, "Paddy Mac, I've got a bed for you." So he said, "I knew you'd be here or dead." So that was my first finding of a friend, and he proved to be a wonderful friend throughout prison camp days.
What was your feelings? Were you depressed, happy, sort of fearful of what to expect when you first arrived in the camp? I know it was,
well, yes.
Looking back, it was just a great big adventure in some regards.
Yes, you are fearful because you have no idea what is going to happen to you. There's all sorts of rumors go around prison camps, as you know, and rumors went around that they're going to shoot us at one time, and you get in with 1,000 other young chaps who in your own age bracket, and you have that comradeship, and there's always a number of people there who are great morale boosters. I think that they did a lot for the morale of the 100 men who were in each room. You can visualize a room with 4 25-watt bulbs, 100 men in bunks, winter time, darkness at 4 o'clock, and you're there till the morning at 8 o'clock. Same every day, spring, summer, winter. and you get propaganda coming from the loudspeakers telling you that you'll never ever see home again, or your friends, your wives or sweethearts, and especially the Lust gangsters, as they called us.
The air gangsters.
Yeah, the air gangsters, yes. That we will build brick by brick what we had bombed and do something good in your life.
But you also got some radio messages from the other side, from the Allied side. Now, how did that ever happen?
Well, there was a story how the radio got into camp. At one time, commandants did change. At one time, we had a commandant he was an artillery officer, who was a great man for physical culture. He had started boxing, and he started all sorts of things. And the boys who put on shows in the little huts, they asked for a piano. The working parties who were outside got some German marks for the work, especially the army, and they asked permission. There's a piano for sale in the village. Could they buy it? He said, okay. But inside the piano was a shortwave radio. We got into camp, and that's how it was brought in the piano. And the BBC News was not read out every night, but very often. Actually, our chap who was the senior man in camp used to get up on the table and read what he would call the bedtime story each night to BBC News. And we used to get news before the German guards got news. We would tell them what was happening, especially when the second front opened.
Did you hear about Stalingrad on the radio?
Yes, we heard about Stalingrad.
Now, that happened in the winter coming into the spring of 1943.
Yes.
And did you know when did you realize that was starting to be the turning point of the war?
I think we realized then that it was a turning point of the war, because there's quite a number of people who were very forward and not afraid to say things, and they used to see the guards going through our billet on guard, and they would shout after them, Uncle Joe's coming. Uncle Joe's coming for you. Joe Stalin. And we knew then that the turning point had come, and that's when morale was given a big boost.
What was the primary activity in that camp, day to day?
Day to day, I think, was food. You got a thin, watery soup in the morning, the German ration, a seventh of a loaf of horrible, moldy rye bread.
With the usual amount of sawdust in it?
Yes, it was rolled in sawdust. And you got 4 potatoes, usually too bad, and hot water at night if you had fuel to heat the copper up. The Red Cross kept us alive, actually, with the food parcels that came through.
And here is a mock-up of a food parcel.
Well, this is an actual box that the food parcels came. This is 9 inches by 12.
And this is Spam in a can, quite literally.
Spam in a can. I couldn't get the original, but I did fill this with what was almost equivalent to what was received for one man for a week, and you had 21 meals out of this box.
And so you split this with your mucker?
Yeah, you get one each.
And what's a mucker?
A mucker is the person that you share everything with, if possible. Sometimes there were 3 and 4 muckers together, but usually 2. And that person had to be someone who got along well with yourself. He divided what he got from home, you divided what you got from home when the parcels did get through. And be sure of this. And usually one person looked after the cooking and the other person did other jobs.
And to supplement this, you had the Irish potato mafia as well.
Yes, that was something that funny.
How did that work?
Well, there was an Irish guard worked in the cookhouse, and when I got there first, I was asked would I participate in the Irish potato racket, as they called it. What you had to do was take a little haversack and get out the compound, get down through past the guard at the gate as if you were on business. Get to the cookhouse, throw the empty sack in the second window, wait 2 minutes. If it didn't come out again, just take off. 2 minutes, the sack would come out with potatoes in it, cooked. Then you had to get them back past the guard, up to the hut, and divide them among maybe 6 or 7 other people who did the same job taking their turns to do that.
Now, one of the more unpleasant activities was when they chained prisoners with handcuffs and foot-long chains for some of the time. Now, why was that? Is that just for demoralization?
Well, the reason for that was something that happened at Dieppe, apparently. Some of the German prisoners were taken at Dieppe, and the rumor is that they were lying with their hands tied. And it was a reprisal that the Germans carried through with, first of all, it was with string, Red Cross string. You're tied in the morning at 8 o'clock till 4:30. Then they had handcuffs made with a short chain. You could put your hands in your pockets, but we were able to pick the locks with, well, the keys they open cans with, the bully keys. We were able to pick the locks with those and take one chain off, which meant you had two handcuffs all on one side. And if you were found with the handcuffs off, they usually took you outside to the wire, and the German in charge would chain you up to the wire for whatever he thought time was necessary. And that was tough in the winter time. It was 30 or 40 below to be chained up outside. I was lucky enough never to get caught. But we did pretty well with those. 8 o'clock in the morning till 5. And at first I had an awful job trying to pick the locks, but after a while you get quite proficient at it.
Generally speaking, in the camp, were you well treated or not well treated, or somewhere sort of in between as an average?
Well, I think the German army was like every other army. You get the goods and the bads. And sometimes the guards, we had Unterofficer Kussel, who was there permanently. He was the Unterofficer in charge of our compound. And he was very proud to be in charge of the Air Force at that time. Then you get other people passing through, either to the Russian front or coming back for arrest. We found that the Hitler Youth passing through, sometimes they were there for a short time guarding us, and they were really tough, really bad. You just don't look them in the eye, or you got a rifle butt in your shoulders. But on the whole, I would say the guards were fairly good, especially those who came back for a rest period from the Russian front. And they were terrific, most of them. And they sometimes you would get the odd one who would come and sit in the bed and speak a little bit of English and show you pictures of his family and talk about soccer. And you got the bad ones there too, of course.
At one point, the Red Army was getting close. The winter of 1944 going into 1945, and you were marched out of the camp, 40,000 men on the Death March.
Yes, that was the 21st of January 1945. The Russians were 20 miles away. In fact, they could feel the ground shuddering with the barrage of their cannon. And we were sure that the Russians would liberate us. But one morning, they told us the day before to get any small kit that we wished to take with us, for we'd been moving to another camp. And on that morning, it was a horrible morning. It was snow and ice, and I think it was 25 below. They marched us west, and on the way out of camp we were given a Red Cross parcel each, and we walked all that day and all that night, and the next day it was the second night when we got somewhere to rest for the night. That went on for 250 miles till we got to a place called Gorlitz, a prison camp. Actually, it was the prison camp where the Stalag VIIIB Great Escape boys were taken and then exterminated, taken into the woods and shot. We didn't know that then, of course. But it was a scary sort of camp. There was hardly anybody there. It was empty. And the rumors went around again. They're bringing us here to get rid of us. They're going to shoot us all. But the winter days, we marched from 7 in the morning until maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Then they would start looking for somewhere to put us. And you take 40,000 people on the roads, and it wasn't the main roads, it was all little byways they took us. And they would open up farmyard, barns, and other places they could put us and just push you in there, standing up, till you get filled up and then close the door. And you were there till the morning. And that went on for 40 days.
You describe in horrifying detail what it's like to march on icy roads.
Yeah.
And some fellows' boots had holes in them and no boots at all, and it just sounded utterly unbelievable.
Well, some people thought that they would be liberated and they would never need the good warm clothing. And when your stomach was empty and you wanted food...
That was back in the camp.
Back in the camp, people would sell boots or sell heavy coat for food. So when it came to winter in the march, some people just went out with their jackets and footwear, which was absolutely of no use at all, worn right through.
How many perished on that march, do you know?
We don't know, and I was trying to find out there was hundreds perished in that march, and I was reading an article the other day and said that no one knows how many actually perished on the march.
Now, your downfall came when you drank water from a stream where upstream there were some bodies of...
Yes, that was after I had accomplished almost about 400 miles or 450, and we got a ration of very salty horse meat from the Germans, and we were so thirsty after that and asked permission to drink out of the stream. It was a break-up, and the ice was going out and the water was flowing, and we did drink out of it. And then after that, a few days, people were having dysentery. And apparently there were a number of dead bodies floating further upstream where they'd been strafed by our Western Air Force. But I walked for a long time until I came to a hill and just couldn't make the hill. First of all, I lost my buddies. I finished up with all the stragglers behind the column.
You could, because throughout you tried to stick with your section, didn't you?
Tried to stick. We did that every morning. We stuck with those people who we had lived with for those years and stayed with them, and marched 5 abreast, and always tried to get to the front of our own little column because it was easier to march that way. But we never marched, we just stumbled along part of the time. But then I lost them and couldn't keep up to them. The odd time I was able to get up and meet them again, but after a time I just fell back among the rabble, those who were sick and with dysentery. So eventually there was a hill I came to and just couldn't make it, and I passed out in the snow. And eventually there was someone carrying me out, and I sort of came to consciousness on some sort of a wagon, horse-drawn wagon. I was taken to 4 little huts in the forest where there were a Serbian Red Cross unit that was serving the Serbian prisoners who were working in the forest. And there I met a Russian doctor who lived in Omsk, even himself a prisoner, and he fed me spoonfuls of charcoal to bung me up because of the dysentery. And eventually I asked the question, who was it that brought me here? Because the wagoneer just left me, the West End people, and moved on, and I never knew who they were or who had saved me. So I asked this Russian doctor, was there a possibility it could be someone from a little village which was close by that saved my life, and could he in any way find out who it was? He said, yes, I will ask the German authorities if I can speak German, and if I can find out who it was. Anyway, I was there for a couple of days, and on my way to a station, they were taking me to a railroad station. They're trying to get me on a train, which was going to a British prisoner of war hospital, 9C, south of Frankfurt, that hasn't yet been touched by the war, and there was a hospital there. He came to me the day they were taking me to the station, fed me some more charcoal, and shook hands, and said, I was able to find the person who picked you up. And how he put it was, he said, this person was a civilian enemy of your country and mine, and they came once a week from another area to the village for supplies, and were passing at that time, at dawn that day, and find me. The horse stopped and wouldn't move, and the wagoneer got off to find out why the horse wouldn't move and find me in the snow. So actually it was the horse who saved me, in a way. And he said that this enemy of your country and mine, he said, had a big decision to make. They had lost their marriage partner in an air raid on Frankfurt, he says, by your Air Force. They had lost a son on the Russian front, he says, by my comrades. And they had the decision to make whether to let you lie and die to make up for one of the two people they had lost. And so they decided to pick you up. And on his way out the door, he wished me good luck. He stopped, turned, and said, by the way, the savior was a woman. It was the farmer's wife who picked me up. It was her husband who was killed in Frankfurt. So I never did meet that person or find out who they were. After finding the three young Dutch people, I would like to also have found her.
Back in England, you were back sort of on Civvy Street just as Victory Europe Day was happening. It was May 1945. And
yes.
you had been back to England. You'd not quite left the service, and you were on your way back home. And what was it like getting back home to Belfast?
Well, it's funny, you can go away for a holiday, and you can go away for a month and come back, and everything is as it was when you left. After 2 years, when I came back, it's a wonderful feeling to come back and look at things. And nothing had changed, really. The house was the same. The old clock was there on the mantelpiece, and the fire was lit, and the old Chesterfield, and the mirror on the wall, and the old hall stand with all the clothes on it that looked like it was going to fall over all the time. But it was wonderful to be back home again. And I think one of the biggest things we learned from being prisoners for either 2 years or almost four years for the Dunkirk boys or more, that you have freedom of movement. There's no barbed wire and no machine guns pointing at you all the time. And to be able just to walk down the street and walk across the street and go where you wish, I think is something that everyone should be so proud of, because they don't realize what it's like unless you have had your freedom taken away from you.
And many people sacrificed their lives for that.
Many sacrificed their lives.
Including the crew members on your plane, and you paid a visit to their graves
yes,
sometime back.
I went back in 1983 with my son and my brother and his son from Los Angeles. Went back to find those 6 graves. I took them out of Holland and made that circle before I left, and took a 30-mile radius. I sent letters to every little post office and every little village within that 30-mile radius, asking, does anyone remember 1943 carrying a young man into their home?
And they found, and you were found.
I was found by a chap who took my letter. He was in the underground during the war himself. He was retired. Took my letter, went around the whole countryside knocking on doors, till eventually he came to this house. And the old gentleman asked him to wait, and got a book from his library, and then went to a certain page and took a little piece of paper out from a certain page with my name on it. He had kept for 40 years, and that was a reunion with those 3 young people.
And you also had a written reunion with a pilot who shot you down.
The pilot who shot us down, yes, Brigadier General Werner Streib of the New Luftwaffe. He was the commanding officer of Venlo Night Fighter Squadron in 1943. He was Squadron Ace. And I was told that he survived the war and worked for NATO. So I wrote, a year after I'd found those 3 people in Holland, I wrote to Bonn, to West Germany, to Bonn headquarters, asking if they knew, and if he was still alive, and knew his address, would they please send it to me. And it was about a month or 2 later, I got a letter from Brigadier General Werner Streib from Munich, and that letter, a nice letter, saying that he got shot down himself once, but he could not just certify that it was he who shot our plane down. But we were able to prove through the archives afterwards, German archives, that it was him who shot our plane down.
So, any sort of thoughts just to wrap up your this aspect of your life and how it might have given yourself a view of the world?
I think that our young people today are not given enough history of that time. You go to Holland, and every person in Holland seems to know. They know all the history of course, they were occupied. We were never occupied in this country. I think being occupied it stays with their families for generations, because each one in Holland had a father or a mother or uncle shot or tortured by the enemy. But I think that we should teach the children more about what war is like, and people just sometimes don't want to talk about it, don't want to read a book like mine. They want to forget about it, and I think that is sad, because if you go that road, we're sliding into another war probably. People don't know what it's like.
If you forget your history, you're going to repeat it.
Yes, definitely. And it's sad that so many people I've talked to, young people, who didn't even know what VE Day was. And that is sad, because I think VE Day was liberation for not only us in prison camp, but liberation for so many people in Canada who would have lost their lives, and it was finished. There was no more slaughter.
In the summer of 1995, you went to the Queen's Garden Party at Buckingham
Yes,
Palace.
I just came back a couple of weeks ago I got an invitation to the Queen's Garden Party at Buckingham Palace, and I didn't get a chance to talk to the Queen, but I did talk to Prince Philip for a short time, and that was very interesting. And a few days ago, I got a letter from the Queen herself, so from her secretary, that I had sent a book onto the palace through her Commodore Clark, who was the president of the Air Force Association in London, and I got a nice letter from the Queen saying that, from fellows, saying that the Queen thanks me very much and is thrilled, and that she will pass my book on to the Queen Mother. So that's gratifying to get something like that from the royal household.
It's been probably decades since any former serving member in the Allied forces wrote memoirs about time in a prison camp or time in war. A lot of books came out in the 1950s, and this book has come out in the 1990s and is now the more current document, which would apply to tens of thousands of POWs on the Allied side who were held in Europe and by the Japanese in the Far East. But your treatment's a lot better than what those people suffered in the Far East.
Far East, well, they suffered a lot more than we did. A lot more than we did.
And tribute must be paid to those people,
actually,
too.
A big tribute to those two. Sometimes we said that after we heard about all this, that our stay in prison camps, sometimes I would say a holiday camp in comparison to the camps in Japan, because Japanese camps were death traps.
Well, your book is an extraordinary document. It's written from the heart.
Thank you.
Beautifully written. And I think it should be required reading in high schools and colleges, just as a snapshot, a written snapshot. It's kind of an odd thing to say, isn't it? Of that particular time in 20th century history. And you're right, if young people are not taught their history, they are going to run into the same problem.
That's right, they are. And it's gratifying to find my mailbox with letters from people I don't know, from Ontario, from all over the place, or people thanking me for writing it. And that one just the other day saying from a lady in Kelowna, she said, "You changed my whole thoughts on the war." She had no idea what it was like, but your book has clarified it for me. She says, "I've got a daughter of 20 years of age, and boyfriends come," she says, "and I can see them at 20 and you at 20, and think that they would be going through the same thing if it was today." So those things are gratifying. But I'm glad I did it. I just have to say I did it for the family, and it mushroomed into something that's not published.
And our thoughts go back to your brave comrades who never made it past the age of 20, and they lie buried in Holland.
That's right. And I may say that the graves of those 6 comrades of mine, they are tended so wonderfully by the Dutch people. Flowers are put there regularly by Dutch people. They're not just those, one grave, but all the graves. And you'd think that there were some family members there all the time tending to them. But the War Graves Commission, I think, and the Dutch people have done a wonderful job on those graveyards. And then I was shown another graveyard close by. I think there's a picture on the board there to the left corner of 30,000 young Germans very close by in another graveyard. I think it's a picture of me standing in the middle there, and you can turn 180 degrees and into the distances across. So it was, I should say, the cream of both nations were slaughtered young men. And in Bomber Command alone, the Air Force Bomber Command, there's 55,500 young men killed in that one area alone, Bomber Command.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you for watching, and good night.
We're interested in your comments on this or any other program.